Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
and a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human,
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture,
and what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion.
Hey, Erin.
Hey, Kelley.
How are ya?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. We have a really exciting guest today. This is my friend Felicia Murrell, who Felicia and I, we met actually before we did I talked a little bit about the Center for Action and Contemplation and Roar's program, the Living School. And we both were in the same cohort in the Living School. So that was really exciting. But actually, we knew each other prior to that. We had friends in common, and we were kind of Enneagram buddies for a couple workshops and stuff. So Felicia and I have a couple different connections. But I wanted to introduce Felicia. She is an author, and she lives in Woodbury, Minnesota. She is a spiritual companion, speaker, certified master life coach, and a former ordained pastor with over 20 years of church leadership experience. And she's also served in the publishing industry as a freelance copy editor. She's written books and articles all over, but her two books, she has a book called Truth Encounters, and her latest book that we're going to talk about today is And, the Restorative Power of Love in an Either-Or World. And I just want to drop that she's got some wonderful people supporting this book and telling you that this is a book you should absolutely go out and buy. We've talked about Richard Rohr on the podcast a lot, and Father Richard says, in her heartfelt poetic narrative, she takes you deep into the heart of a love that insists that we are not either or, but both and, exposing the isms that seek to divide us. And Paul Young, Erin, I don't know if you know who Paul Young is, but have you heard of the book, The Shack?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a major bestseller, and they made it into a movie. Paul Young says about Felicia's book, if you have no intention of being confronted, challenged, and changed, I would avoid this book. Well, Erin and I love to be confronted, challenged, and changed. So we are excited to talk to you today. Felicia Murrell, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be with you.
So, Felicia, we wanted to start just by kind of introducing you to our audience and maybe give us a little bit of a background on kind of who you are, where you've come from, where you are now. And we'd love to just hear a little bit of your story.
I can try. I'm a product of the South. I was born in Washington, D.C. and raised in rural Johnston County, North Carolina. So just about 20 miles from North Carolina state capital of Raleigh. And ultimately what I tell people is that I am a human with an everyday experience of living, right? Like my greatest accomplishment of my existence is really love. And that journey it's been a thread that's woven through a lot of different things. My husband, Doug, and I joke all the time that we've lived thousands of different lives. So I could go in at any point of the story. I think the overarching thing is I consider myself a religious mutt in that I've had lots of different church experiences, church denomination experiences, interspiritual experiences, all of it. And those things really formed and informed a lot of who I was, who I am, how I parented. And they've ebbed and flowed and shifted and changed over the years, but largely that's what makes me me.
Thank you.
Oh.
In the book, so I love the title of the book. Can you talk to us a little bit about the title, about the and what the and means to you?
I've just felt like probably really strongly in the last 8 years of our collective landscape, but even before that, that and is one of the smallest but most powerful words that we can embrace right now. It feels like such a bridge. And what I began to see was there felt like such a large and harsh cry for rightness.
Mhm.
And not to be understood or even to be heard, but just to be right and to scream really loudly about rightness. And in that need to be right, in the need to make our actions and our beliefs our identities, we've lost how to be with one another. And so for me, and is that bridge that helps us return to each other in a way that I don't necessarily have to lose myself or my position in a thing. And I can also make room. Like the circle is big enough to enlarge, 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 and continue to make room. And so I
Mhm.
think for me at least, when I really began to dismantle ideas about hierarchy and comparison and competition and that kind of caste totem pole where I'm stepping on top of someone, that power over paradigm, how do I live in a world and move and have my being? And for me, that's and.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's so well said. Kelly and I have had lots of conversations about this, and I had always kind of been thinking about it as these concepts of like the death of nuance, or like that everything is this paradox, and the solution is to be inside of this paradox, right? As opposed to trying to like grab onto one end or another. And I guess one of the things that I have, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but one of my theses on this is a lot of it has to do with the way that we communicate in media, like that this transformation of the way that we experience the world and each other. I think the article you shared with us, you talked about the vision finder, or what was the
The master, yes.
The
Yes, yeah, the
Viewmaster, yeah.
Viewmaster that you look at when you're a kid, but just that we all, have these Viewmasters and these perspectives that we move through the world with, but how do we expand those, put on different ones so that we can see things through other people's experiences, as opposed to just like mine is the only one that's right, you know?
Yeah. And Erin, the thing that's so crazy about that is for me, I see that largely like in Western religion, like the influence of
Yeah.
Western religion on us, because when you study Eastern religions, they're not afraid of paradox or contradiction.
Mhm.
Like,
No.
when you look at Taoism and other um, different like Chinese religions and
Yeah.
things like that, you see that woven all in there. And I'm like, okay, so there's literally a pathway to hold, like you said, to be inside of that paradox and to hold it. And I can remember the first time I took yoga, and the yoga instructor was like helping me lean into a pose and was like, stay right there. And she said something like, um, the tension is where you'll find balance.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that it like got in my head. It really started messing with me because I'm like, oh, okay. So if I'm holding this pose and I'm feeling tension and balance, when I go this way or I go this way, really there's a comfort there, right? Like there, and it sent me down this rabbit trail of thinking about how when we are afraid, the thing that we run to often is either control or is comfort. We're
Mhm.
numbing out, we're trying to find something to escape and find comfort in, or we want to wrest that thing by the horns and control it and
Yeah.
manipulate it and make it do a certain thing. And so, in some ways, I feel like our Western religion, which has so shaped America, has failed us, and that we don't know how to hold nuance well. We don't know how to stand inside of paradox.
Yeah. Yeah. And also when it comes to the other thing that you were writing about was that the inner work that has to happen to be able to do that. And it makes me think about, so I love stoicism. And I mean, one of the fundamental tenets, right, is to understand the things that you can control and be able to kind of let go of the things that you cannot. But that, to be able to do that, it well requires so much inner work and examination. So I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that inner work that's so essential to being able to be inside the paradox, to be the and.
Yeah, I think it's so key. And I will actually tie it back because this, for me, it feels like a thread inside of particularly the Christian tradition of religion. There's this teaching about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so often inside of that teaching, people focus a lot on the evil, but not the good.
Mm,
But what I've seen so much is essentially what that tree represents. The metaphor of it to me is all about binaries, right?
mm,
And it's about splitting the poles between two things. And in order to have knowledge of something being evil, and I'm using air quotes, in order for it to be evil, I also have that same kind of knowledge of something being good. And so then I live in a world that tells me, whether politically correct or performative allyship or whatever, I want to be on the side of right.
mhm.
But who gets to determine what rightness looks like? And
Right.
so in the bleeding horns, your right says it's this, 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 and this, which is all a certain kind of narrative. And
Yeah.
my right says it's this, and this, and it's all a certain kind of narrative. And so and then I'm going to force you to believe my right or make you do
Mm,
it my way, and we have this back and forth where we essentially create a chasm so wide, right?
mm,
Okay, so that takes me to the inside. um, what I see inside of that is all external agency. It's all external validation, external power, external control. It's all something outside of myself trying to tell me what to believe and how to live. But we are all imago Dei. We all created in the image and likeness of light, of love, and we are teeming with life. And so when we drop down into ourselves and we begin that interior work, whether we do it through Jungian, whether we do it through inner healing for church people, or whether we do it through Enneagram, whatever resource, personality types, whatever vehicle we use to come into heart design, that interior work, so that we come home to ourselves in a way that Howard Thurman would use the word, the sound of the genuine, that we can quiet the cacophony of outside to hear the voice within,
mm,
to hear the resonance of what I call that inner knower, that deep wisdom that lies within. Then all of a sudden, the leaning of the poles and the shifting and the rightness and what we think is good or evil, all of that, it blurs. And we come to a place within ourselves that we can define ourselves for ourselves. We know what love sounds like and feels like for ourselves. And we come home to ourselves in a way that now we're no longer invading or abandoning, to use Jim Finley's language, ourselves, right? I'm not going to be the thing that eats away at myself. I'm not judging myself, hating on myself, shaming, critiquing myself, any of that. So I'm not invading my own self, but neither am I abandoning myself and allowing you to come in and do that, right? That's my North Star. And when I have that type of guidance, that type of agency and freedom from within, it creates enough spaciousness for me to be able to widen that circle and to hold space
mm.
for you on your journey without needing to control it or manipulate it or even to name it. I just
Mhm.
allow you to have your space.
I love that. I love that so much. And I feel like that is there it feels like a a space that we are all aiming for, right? That's the ultimate. And to get there, there's this kind of ego work to do so that we can have a sense of desire and inner knowing without these kind of expectations and egos that cause us to just impose and that this idea of love. And this feels very, and this might be because I just came from a Mary Magdalene retreat this like last weekend, and so I'm very into like the feminine right now. But this feels like a very feminine uh, path towards this kind of healing, this going in, and then this expression, this creating of love within, and releasing of love out, without needing to hold on to it and control it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make a lot of sense. I use this expression a lot, or this example a lot, and I was thinking about it when you said that, and that not needing to hold on to it or control. Um, I think I'm working through my energetic languages, and
Mhm,
because I've learned them so much in terms of masculine energy and feminine energy, and
mhm,
I'm trying to hold space for my non-binary,
mhm,
transgender, non-conforming, and so
mhm,
I want a universal energetic language that helps me to grasp um, the beauty of the energies and how they dance and weave together
mhm,
without necessarily splitting them again on the poles. But
mhm,
there are energy currents and streams that definitely um, make and produce and cultivate. And there are energetic streams that receive and welcome and create belonging and nurture and that kind of thing. And and when I think of love and allowing love and accepting love, I think of in the biblical narrative, Mary's Magnificat. I think of it
mhm,
as a "be it done unto me." It's something that I do receive, right?
mhm,
And my husband and I joke that you can't kiss and talk at the same time.
mhm,
So in terms of even like apophatic prayer, cataphatic prayer, that kind of thing, receiving love is definitely a apophatic. It's you're just in a posture of surrender and allowing. And the movement is, if I take my hands and I clench them like this, whatever I'm holding on to, I'm suffocating the life out of. I'm
mhm,
holding on to it with such attachment and such resistance, honestly, right? Because I'm trying not to let that thing go. That inside of my clenched fist, it has no breathing room at all. And this is largely a sign of fear, that we cling so resolutely to things, whether that is people, ideas, places, uh, clothes that we should get rid of, any of that is all this. And if we hold our hands open so loosely that things can just fall off, and there's an inattentiveness to it, and there's a lack of care about it. Um, this also is not a posture that represents love in a deep way. But when I cup my
mhm,
hands so that things can flow through, water can flow through, but if I'm holding something like this, there's it invites me to be present to it, because I'm
mhm,
holding it tenderly, I'm understanding the fragility and the sacredness of what I have in my hand. So I'm going to be careful with it. I'm going to know that it's there, right? But I'm also holding it loosely enough that when it's time for that thing to move on, to
mhm,
let go, it can go freely without me clenching. And
mhm,
I think the posture of love is like this in the
mhm,
world, that it's not so tight that we're holding on. It's not so loose that we don't give a, you know, um, but it's a presence to it. I'm presencing you. I'm presencing concerns. I'm presencing life with my presence in this present moment. And so I think that's the energy of it that, and that does in a lot of ways feel, um, for lack of another term that I'm still really desiring to learn, like a feminine energy. Yeah.
Mhm. And kind of what you're describing, one of our teachers, Cynthia Bourgeot, has this idea of the divine exchange, which is this kind of, as soon as love comes to you, we accept it and then we release it. Like anything, right? That, like you said, that clenching this, anything that we hoard cuts us off from all receiving, right? And that goes with money, that goes with ideas or dogmas or um, anything, right? So the kind of that idea of holding things loosely so as to kind of receive and let go, receive and let go, um, is such a beautiful stance, and also I think it's a really vulnerable stance.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm wondering from you as a Black woman in America, growing up in the South, it's a different stance. Like there's a stance, there's a vulnerability and a risk that you take in standing in that place of vulnerability than there is for me as a white woman to stand in that place. And I'm wondering if you can speak to maybe, well, I have a couple of questions, just like how do you do that? Like how do you stand in that kind of the generosity of that place? And then two, what and you speak to this in your book and you give really specific and like practical ways, and I really appreciated that, as to how people can how we can support our friends of color in 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 just being a friend and lifting them up, so that they can be in that space of and.
Yeah. I think because I did grow up in the South, so part of, I think, surviving in the South that I grew up, and I was born in the 70s. I was born in 72. So um, I grew up in the South through the late 70s, early 80s. I graduated high school in 90. Um, but the South that I grew up in is a very interesting place in that um, you learn from the body language of your grandmas and your aunties, how to shrink yourself, how to stay small. You step off the sidewalk, your head is down. Um, and you're doing those things for safety. They knew the risk of uh, if you tried to be too big, what could happen. And without telling their own stories or giving you their fear, they gave you their fear, right? Um, and you more is caught than taught, and so you did what you
Mhm.
saw. Um, and at the same time, we also were the generations of school integration, right? In the ways that, we're going to school now. And so you're um, navigating biases and prejudices of parents and grandparents and great grandparents, but your friends in school and you're kind of hanging out. And so your white friends are also having to navigate a world that's right with prejudice. Like I tell the story of my the twins I played with in school, and we were great friends at school. And I'm like, oh, I want to come over. And they were just blatantly honest in a 5-year-old kind of way, about why I could not. And to them, that's their life. And it was nothing. To me, it scarred me in a way like, oh, and years later, I could understand now why we call my great grandmother big grandma, why big grandma taught us to do certain things or were a certain way when we would go across the tracks. Now, on our side of the tracks, we had all the freedom to be who we were and to live a certain way and be kids and all of that. But when you went across the tracks, which is where everything economically was on the white side of town. And so when we went across the tracks, there was a certain way to be and exist in the world. And I think by sophomore year, um, I was starting to get angry, really angry at the injustices, the difference, the racism. I started taking, I was really smart in school. I started taking AP classes very early. And I remember in an English class, the teacher, she just kept giving me, we would be graded on a scale from 1 to 5, and she kept giving me threes. I would hand in a paper just knowing like this is the best paper, and I get a three, I get a three. And all around me, my classmates, they're having fours and fives and they're all smiles, and I'm getting threes. And I go to the teacher and I'm like, Miss Wallace, what can I do to get better? Like, how do I take this paper and make it a five? And she goes, there's nothing you can do. You're writing the best you can for who you are,
Mm.
and there was this belief about how Black people were supposed to be, the limitations of our intelligence, all of that. I mean, this is just woven into small towns throughout the South, really to this day. Um, and so my response to that, even in looking at schools, the guidance counselor was like, "Oh, you need to go to an HBCU. Like, there's no way you're going to any other school." And I intentionally didn't apply to one historically Black college, to my father's anger, but it was kind of like I'm going to show you. Like, I'm going to show
Mhm.
you that I can get a full scholarship to Wake Forest. I can get into Vanderbilt University. I can get into Cornell. I can get into Boston University.
Mhm.
I can get into Carnegie Mellon. I can go
Mhm.
to schools. I can do this. Who are you to say that I can't?
Mhm.
And so what developed was an armor of anger.
Mhm.
And anger became the thing that protected me.
Yeah.
And anger was my front man until love changed me,
Mhm.
right? And and when you armor up, when you live a defended way to protect yourself from pain getting in, you also bar yourself in to love getting out, right?
Yeah.
Because nothing comes past the fort. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out. And so I'm living, even in church, as just my friends call me Mad Dog. I just did not stop. I was like, really, anger was my front man.
Yeah.
It was how I protected myself um, from the pain and disappointment of that reality until love changed me, right? And so when love began to come in, and even that dance with love, and a lot of truth encounters is that, so I won't go into it, but I even that dance with love, the invitation, the wooing, the sitting that happened in the quiet place of contemplation, I was afraid to have this. I felt like when I use the word love, capital L, I'm talking about the divine, but I felt like I was going to see the same type of disappointment on the face of the divine that I had seen on teachers, that I had seen on parents and grandparents and other people. And the day that I felt love's face shine upon me um, was the day that things really began to change inside me. And once you have a kind of encounter with love that sets a seal on your heart, um, there's no amount of anything that can take that away. I don't need the language of any religion to define the experience. The experience is the experience. And now my whole life is led by love. Like each morning I wake up and I welcome all that is eternal within me, and I greet the day, and I acknowledge the face of love, that I can be led by love, right? And what would a society be if we all would, it does sound aspirational, but what would it be like to have such an encounter, and to change our collective in a way that love leads us to want the best, to see the best in everyone, to see the sacred divinity, the sacred dignity in everyone, and then want to see each person on this planet, even the planet itself, to thrive and flourish and live freely.
Yeah. Yeah, it is I mean, it is aspirational, right? I mean, it's because it requires, I feel like as I'm listening to you, part of this ability to kind of be open with the spirit of love that you're describing, I feel like it requires a certain level of confidence and humility, that it is very hard for people to achieve. And I think when, you know, what happens in this other end of that is this, um that wall that you're talking about putting up, and so that you can, that you can sort of accept the yin and yang, right, in yourself, and then also see that that's true of other people, that no one is fully good or bad, that we're all both, and then if I can see that in myself and then I can appreciate that about other people, then I'm able to be more generous with both. It's how do we move more people to that place, is and that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah. I hope I want it to be an invitation for people to consider. What I think is two things come to me. One, I think this is about trust, a lot about trust, because truth flourishes in the soil of love. But first, we have to trust that we're safe enough to go there. And a lot of times, for anyone that's had a practice of meditation, of mindfulness, or contemplative spirituality, where they're sitting on a mat or doing some walking or something, what you know is that when the body, let me start this, so much of our life we live from our head up. We're all about ration and logic and reason. And even the way that we try to process and do, it leaves out the heart center, the gut center, the wisdom of the body. And I think we come into the fullness of ourselves, that kind of alignment, when we integrate it all: head, heart, gut, wisdom of the body together, right? And so learning has its place, integration has its place, embodiment has its place. And inside of that thread, we begin to practice this life of compassion, which for me, the practice of compassion is to embody the way of love. And and so inside of this, the mindfulness, the contemplation, the sitting, and the safety of those moments, and the safety of that quiet, everything that we've ever repressed starts rising to the fore. All of it, all of our trauma, all of that stuff. And I think this is why Father Thomas Keating would call um, his practice of centering prayer divine therapy. Because what happens is all that stuff the unconscious starts to offload and it comes up. Many people, in the face of safety, and I'm using contemplation, but I know this to be true also about intimate relationships, which is why when people get into an intimate partnership, um their drama stops coming it starts coming up and it causes tension. But part of the reason why it comes up is because for the first time in that that intimacy, you feel safe enough to be your truest self. And your truest self is every part of yourself. It's not just the clean, prettied up version, it's all of it, right? And so our junk comes up. When we're still gripped by shame, we run away from the invitation to sit with the stuff that's coming up. But the fire of love is there to burn away all that opposes love's kind. It's there to is there to help us see and come home to the truth of our being, right? And it's like, okay, these things happen, this, and this happened to me. What part of this is asking to be nurtured and to be tended and to be known? There's a deeper story here.
Mm.
And in my sitting, I get to come home to the truth of who I am. And I can hold those parts with vulnerability, with kindness, right? And so inside of learning to gift myself that kind of compassion, that kind of care and homecoming, I eventually, I'm not saying it happens right away, learn how to, just like Cynthia with the divine exchange, from the overflow. Love is kenotic. It empties itself out, over, and into. And from that overflow of that well that's been healed, that's been filled, I can give to another. Um, I don't think that starts from our head. It has to come from alignment. It has to come from a fully aligned head, heart, gut center, undefended, rested kind of body wisdom. And from there, we move to healing ourselves. When people, Kelley, you asked the question about how do we support, how do we, stand with our friends of color? And people think I'm joking, but I always say, like, heal yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and the reason why I say that is because back to what Erin was alluding to, if I create the interiority, Jim Finley says, all things considered, what's the most loving thing I can do right now? And if I don't allow myself to be gripped by shame, to be gripped by guilt, and I'm walking from a healed interiority, then I'm going to lead with love. And the how might be different every single time because the person in front of me is different. But if I have a healed interiority, I will know the sound of love and I will know how to move and live and respond in ways. Resma, I'm going to butcher the last name,
Wonderful.
Minicum,
Mhm.
he wrote My Grandmother's Hands. He lives
Mhm.
here in Minneapolis. But he always says, if you didn't tell me you were an ally, what about your life would tell me that you
Mm.
were an ally,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So I'm not looking so much necessarily for the doing. Um,
Mhm.
I want the two together. And back to and. When
Mhm.
we embody the practice of compassion, when we embody the way of love, our being and our doing become two sides of the same coin. Not something that I'm having to think about what's the right thing to do or the right thing to
Mhm.
say or how do I rightly show up. No, love. Love is how I live
Mhm.
and move and do that. And when I'm led by love, what I'm doing will be flourishing and life giving. And that's what matters most. Does this lead to life?
Mhm. Thank you for that. That's tremendous. And two things I just want to go back to what you said. Just want to make sure that people heard what you said when you were talking about intimate partnerships and you said intimacy into me you see. Is- I love that. I love that. And I love you pairing that with contemplative practice, whether that's a meditation, mindfulness, centering prayer practice, that those that and I've never thought about that, that our primary kind of bonding relationships are kind of do that same work because you know, that that sitting practice that we have is that same intimacy with the divine, right? And it's that same kind of how we rub up against the other. And we are actually interviewing this weekend. We're talking about centering prayer. So this is wonderful that you're referencing this. So thank you. Um, yeah. Oh man, I love all that so much. Um, you. This is one of the questions I have, and I think you just kind of spoke to it, and but maybe you can kind of go into it a little bit more, where you talk about something bearing the mark of love. Um, and I'm wondering, like if you know, and my question was kind of like, how do we identify things that bear the mark of love? But I'm wondering if maybe it's even more important for us to kind of be reflective on ourselves and say, how can I look to my own intentions, to my actions, to my heart, and know that my heart is marked by love? Like, what are some things that I might look for and recognize in myself, in ourselves? And maybe even defining that, like, what is that mark of love?
Mm, yeah. It's really interesting because I think I imagine for me and probably so many others, it's very easy to name what's not love, right?
Mhm.
So like to come at it through negation, where you can literally say, okay, this isn't an act of love. And if I'm honest, I also, if I drop down deep enough into my body, into the memories that are stored in my cells, there are times that I can remember the touch of love, the smell of love, the feel of love, the sound of love, um, this energetic pulse and resonance of it. Um, and when I talk about when I talk about like bearing the mark of love, love for me is freedom, right? Love is this place of uh, authentic, there's a generosity, there's a genuineness. I'm not even sure there's enough words to describe something that's completely
Mm.
unknowable and yet so personal and deep. But what I'm looking for is the John 10:10, for those that reference from a biblical narrative of I came that you might have life and life to the full. And so when I think about that Greek word is Zoe, or the God kind of life. So when I think about a life that is flourishing, a life that is free, something that is life giving, does this weave us together collectively? Because you cannot love alone. So love is not isolated, right? Love is something that you do, that you give to another. It has to be reciprocal, self-giving, other-centered. There's some mutuality. Love is like a dance. And and so when I'm looking at, does this bear love, can I be I share this story, and maybe it's in Truth Encounters, of I grew up with having a lot of dysfunctional connection with my mom. And for a long, long time, I did not feel loved by my mother. And my dad passed away in 2017. And my dad was kind of the bridge between my mom and I to keep us from killing each other, essentially. And when he passed away, she really thought that I would just kind of disappear from her life. And she did some foul things that I could have, and it would have been completely justified, right? But because of the interior work of my own heart, I got into a place where I know what I can do and what I can't do, what I will do and what I won't do. And so, love for me are those boundaries. So I
Mhm.
had to decide for myself how I could show up for my mom in a way that was true for me and not on the puppet strings of her manipulation or control. Okay.
Mhm.
And so what that looked like, we did not live in the same town. What it looked like for me was going home once a month, doing things that she loved, making sure her house was clean, her refrigerator was stocked, doing all those things that and and for a long time it felt very perfunctory, very obligatory. Over the years that she passed away 5 years after my dad did, but over those 5 years, in the going and the sitting, what I realized was that this is a person who is unhealed. And because of their own drama and trauma and dysfunction, it's not that she doesn't love me. is that she doesn't have the capacity to love beyond the ways that she knows how. And she's really trying, but it comes off intent versus impact. Her intent is to show love. The impact of that was damning as hell.
Mhm.
It was crucial and brutal, right? But that was never her intent, but the impact on me. But once my adult self could see she does not have the capacity, then my little girl self that was still wanted and still needing to be loved could have compassion, or her little girl self that was stunted and never grew up with love in a way that could become the parent that could love in a whole way, right? And so we ended up getting to places where we could be together and laugh together and do things together that was authentic and genuine. That was an expression of love. And I share that story because I think in our society, because of media's portrayal, we all have these images of love being gushy, two-parent homes, and this, and almost like a utopia where everything is bright and rosy and joyful. And love is the whole of living. It's the fullness of life. The highs and the lows, the suffering, the tragedy, it's all of it. It's all of it. And so when you ask about the mark of love, yes, where am I held? Yes, where am I embraced? And yes, where am I safe and can flourish? And who do I want next to me when I am facing hell? Right? And who is safe enough in themselves, has enough capacity within themselves that when an insurrection is going on, a mutiny is going on around me, when things are heating up, that they're not going to abandon themselves and join the insurrection. That's the mark of love. And so when things start getting really, really, really chaotic, I'm not afraid of people's anger. I'm not afraid of their mad. I'm not afraid of the fight. I'm here for it and I understand the journey of it. But I'm also leaning my ear and my heart to the ground for those that bear the mark of love. I'm listening for sane. I'm listening for compassion. I'm listening for kindness. I'm listening for and. Don't judge, don't damn, don't, want to shoot people that are expressing anger because they don't yet know how to deal with the energy that's coursing through them. And also, who's leading with love? Who's guiding us back to shalom? And so I don't know that I know how to define the mark, but I think intuitively we all know it. And so I always tell people, drop down within yourself. There's a feel of safety. There's a sound, there's a knowing. You know, in my head, ultimately I go back to almost like a laughter, right? There's a sense of, think about a sunset when we have this place of awe that causes us to abandon all of our defenses and we can settle in that. That's a mark. I'm looking for that place where I feel safe enough to lean back because I know I'm held here.
Erin, do you have, I feel it looks like you have.
Yeah, I was just thinking about like Kelley, you mentioned ego earlier, and yeah, this like just like I don't know, the dissolving of your ego, right? And then you get to kind of be at this like elevate, a higher frequency, right? Or and that comes through connection, that we can let that part go, that like the me, the I, that we all spend a lot of time in, because that's gets us through our days, right? And there's a necessary element to having some ego, but then the parts of our lives that are that expression of love, or that like pull us out of the me and the I, that pull us towards a more place of transcendence are the times where we're in connection, in like communion with one another, or for those that believe in a higher power, but just something that is larger than yourself.
Which is all that is. Absolutely. Right?
Yeah.
Like whatever that is, that and that's the thing about language. Like I think so many times we get stuck in like the rightness of it has to be this, it has to be this. And no, we're just somehow connected to a sentient largeness that's definitely larger than my little eye. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I feel like there's so many ways that people, like, we do, we experience that in communion. The when we talk, Kelly and I did an episode where we talked about the Dr. Keltner book Awe, and he goes through all the different ways that people experience awe. But some of that is being out in nature, and my wife and I were actually talking about that this morning, because we went for a run in Forest Park, and you're just, in the middle of a forest, and it's easy in those spaces to remember, like, I am small and part of this something that's bigger that's happening around me. But that we also achieve that through, community, and being in connection with others, and that some of it is just observing in other people their bravery, and their wisdom, and recognizing how powerful that is, but there that we can get on that level, through lots of different things, if we're attentive to it.
Yeah. I use this word mirrors, and that's exactly what you're describing to me, at least, Erin, is those things become mirrors. And I think mirrors are invitation into ways of being, invitations um, to sojourning together on the path, you know. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I people used to ask all the time, as they're deconstructing, what about salvation, for those in that Christian paradigm? And I would say the same. I'm like, I would literally tell someone to go walk, take a hike, go hold a newborn baby, and what is the thing that makes your walls come down and put you in that place of awe, that place of wonder and vulnerability and curiosity that invoke the bigness, smallness that, oh, this is so big. This is so big. And I am the ocean and I am a drop in the ocean
Yep,
at
yep,
the same
Mhm.
yep,
time,
yep.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. Um, when you were talking earlier, Felicia, too, about telling the story about your mom and kind of reimagining that definition of love for us and mark of love, and that it's not Hallmark and saccharine, but it's messy and committed. And um, sometimes it can be just, you know, mundane, almost just the mundaneness of just of care. Everyday care. I watch my dad caring for my mom right now, and it's love like I've never seen, but it's not pretty. It's not pretty. And uh, reminded me. So again, I'm I'm still kind of steeped in this Mary Magdalene, but in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, when Mary is talking to the other disciples, um, and she says, and I love this. So they're all crying, like in her gospel. And Erin, I don't know if you know that there's a Gospel of Mary Magdalene.
Oh yeah, you've told me about it.
Okay,
So.
good. All right. Okay, good. So in this, so Jesus is there and he says, he's telling them, what they should do, and then he leaves and they're all crying. And so Jesus leaves and then Mary rises up. It says Mary rose up and she embraced them and she kissed them tenderly and she spoke to her brothers and sisters and says, "There is no need to remain stuck in sorrow, grief, and doubt, for his grace will be with you all. It will guide you, comfort you, shelter, and protect you. Rather, let us be thankful and praise his greatness, for he has brought us together and prepared us for this. And this is the part. Through him, we too can become fully human. And I just love that because it's not saying like, and we will be, rise up to become the divine. It's like, no, what it means to be divine is to be fully human in that messy, imperfect place of love. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If anything, I think that's really what I hoped people would see in the book. And it's actually one reason why the book doesn't have chapters.
Uh-huh.
I believe in fluidity very strongly. And so I wanted to capture the fluidness of life. Life ebbs and flows. Um, so I really wanted to capture that. And also I think the messy complexity of our humanity is what I
Mhm.
wanted the book to be an invitation that this is all the parts of my humanity. This is what it means for me to be human. I'm a
Mhm.
Black um, woman, I identify as female. My life has been shaped largely by church contacts, Christian contacts, and then more interspiritual contacts. Um, and I've parented 4 really beautiful adults,
Mhm.
and I messed up a lot inside of that journey, and
Mhm.
I had to walk a path of forgiveness back to connection in a relationship, moving it from power over paradigms, which often parent-child relationships are power over, to power with. I want to stand in this circle with you, and I want to know who you are as an adult, not the child that lived in my home, because who you are as an adult in the fullness of your own strength and power is very different than the child who had to live in mom and dad's world, right?
Mhm.
Um, and you are a gift, and so, and I want to embrace every single human in that way. I do the same thing with animals too. um, but that's a whole nother story. But I
Mhm.
want to embrace, trees that way too. Like I want to have that curiosity. And if I'm so afraid of drama, so afraid of mess and the complexity, I will always shy away from the knowing. And then that will keep you out there as an object, as my opponent, as my agenda, as my project, and not a part of me that I don't haven't yet experienced and encountered.
I have kind of this is kind of a basic request, but as as we're kind of coming towards the end of this beautiful, wise sharing, I am so grateful for you and your time. Um, I told you kind of in an email that one of the things that I felt woefully undereducated in growing up in a white church was in some things that are so incredibly important for spiritual growth. And that is, it wasn't until maybe, I don't know, 8 years ago that I learned about Howard Thurman, who you referenced, um, and Howard Thurman's influence on Martin Luther King Jr. And even, and how much, I grew up, learning about Martin Luther King Jr., never really understood his concept of beloved community. So just because I felt like that was such a gaping hole in my education, both spiritual and just basic education, I was wondering if you would kind of give us some insight into Thurman and the beloved community.
I can try. Loretta Coleman Brown is like
Yeah.
I'm an expert on Thurman things, but I can try. And it's interesting. I didn't know about Thurman growing up as a little girl either. I came into Thurman as an adult, and my first read was Jesus and the Disinherited. And then I ended up taking a class through BU, and learning more about
Mhm.
Thurman, and then watching some PBS tapes and actually hearing his voice. But Thurman is Thurman had mystical encounters as a child, and his
Mhm.
grandmother was actually enslaved, and then so lived through the emancipation, and was very influential in his life and gifting his relationship. But I think the thing for me that really I'm most impressed by is that Thurman was the first Black pastor that I know of, at least, um, to pastor an interracial, interspiritual, contemplative church in San Francisco. And that church still exists in the Bay Area to today. Um, and he just, I, I don't, his understanding of God is so large that I've literally read so much of his work. And people, when the civil rights movement happened, people actually chided him for not going out and protesting and doing marches and being on the street. But he knew his yes. And he knew that his yes was to be a haven and a support to the leaders that were out there. It wasn't just King. Harding tells stories or told stories of being so depleted and going to lie on Thurman's couch.
Mm.
And he talks about how his wife would bring him, food to nourish his body, but it was the presence of peace in the atmosphere of Thurman's home that would nourish his soul. And
Mm.
he would talk about how often Thurman wouldn't even have to say anything, but just because of the depth of um, spirituality that Thurman himself had cultivated, it like emanated throughout the home, and people would just go and lay on the sofa. And
Mhm.
and it's another, maybe it was Reverend Lawson. Yeah, Reverend Lawson tells a story of intentionally changing a flight to go to San Francisco for 5 hours to just go sit in the chair. And I thought, what
Mm.
energy, right? What relationship does a man possess that it spills, again, that love spilling out over and into the atmosphere of your home, that it creates this place? But yeah, I don't know. I could say so much about Thurman.
He's kind of the embodiment of and, isn't
Yeah,
he?
it is. I'm lost
Yeah.
in words. That I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not even really sure how to go into to the depths of who he is and to capture all of it. But
And he went
so
to
many
did he go to
pieces.
India too? Was it India that he went to?
He went to India. There's a story there about when he went to India with the YMCA. So he and his wife went, and he tells the story of one of the priests there essentially wanted to know how he could worship Christ, how he could be a Christian. Um, and he again goes into that story about the relationship with Christ, him choosing that path, um, despite how American Christianity, I'm using that word, Thurman doesn't, but how American Christianity had warped the ideas, and he talks about Jesus being close to the marginalized, close to the poor, close to the disinherited. But of course, most people get a more Eurocentric and colonized version of Jesus that doesn't really take into his own cultural and historical social location. And when Thurman wrote Jesus and the Disinherited, he really, really, really allied brown skinned Palestinian Jesus with the marginalized, with the poor, with the disinherited through his book. Yeah. And then from there, his other works, he has every Sunday he would do a small, almost like Richard's daily meditations. He would do a small daily meditation, and his church members ended up asking him to take and compile them. So there's meditations of the heart and um, Deep is the Hunger. But these are all just from the bulletin each Sunday where he would write something for his congregation. And they're little small nuggets of wisdom on being in the world, how to be in the world, and that mark. Um, yeah. And I think King's beloved community, his daughter, Bernice King, is doing a really good job of um, trying to resurrect King's idea for a beloved community. But King really, really was trying to combat ways against militarism, consumerism, capitalism, what he called the big and racism, his big three. And he believed in a beloved community to do this, that we all could be together in the world, that we were all connected together. Um, and that there was a just world for us all inside of that. And it was rooted in nonviolence, but it was also rooted in justice and equity in ways that um, I think are a great invitation for us to turn in to get some pearls of wisdom from in these days. Time.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Erin, do you have any final questions or?
I don't know if I have any questions. I was like, I'm pulling up Thurman because I also, that was a gap in I mean, I hadn't heard of him until just today. So,
Wow.
I know, right? And I'm like looking at this list of books, and I mean, there's, is it 25 books or something, right? In here, I mean, so he's pretty prolific.
Yeah.
But I love that the bringing that into the conversation, especially you know, when we think about our current political landscape, our current and all the things that fuel that, right? Whether that's um, capitalism that's kind of reaching its always logical end, right? But creates this great rift in society that makes it difficult for people um, to really like have that, confidence and humility that's required to see others fully. Um, and also, but yeah, I mean, to like, okay, let's pull on the wisdom of the people that have come before and were this source of comfort for other leaders. How do we embody being more like that and learning from
Mhm.
from those individuals in a time where, and even I it's hard. I just feel like our challenges are even greater because our ability to communicate well to each other is just, I feel like it's so hard. Like everybody is just kind of stuck, and maybe there's everyone's sort of just stuck listening to the things that reinforce their point of view. And I don't, I mean, I guess it's conversations like this, but how much
Mhm.
how do we reach broader groups of people to try to embrace those kinds of messages of compassion, and then being able to hold spaces of
Mhm.
comfort for others? It's just, ugh, I don't want to like lament too much because I mean, I'm an optimist, so I appreciate your, you know, optimistic perspective and like wanting to call to, the goodness that's in all of us. Um Sometimes, man, I'm just like, oh yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe that's
I'm
the place
actually
to.
very proud that you see that as optimistic. I am I'm such a realist and I'm very pragmatic. And so it's easy for me to name what it is very colorfully. I don't mind doing that at all. Um and and I'm very honest about the gaps and the hard and how hard it is and how things are. And as you were sharing that, I was thinking of back to Thurman, but I remember um the day that King was shot, there is an actual, you can actually hear his message. Maybe it's PBS did like a documentary on Thurman. And so the day that King was shot, or maybe it's the day after, but he gathers people in the chapel, and he doesn't gloss over one, he's just lost someone that was very dear to him. Uh, the assassination created a lot of fear and a lot of chaos and turmoil, and people were scared. People were really, really scared. And he doesn't join them in the fear. What he does in that, when you're listening to it, and you have to like find something and listen to his voice. So he has this like this cadence to it. I can't read his books quickly because he talks really slowly and rhythmic. And so whenever I'm reading one of his books, I hear his voice in that way. But he draws them into a kind of peace that he himself embodies, while not, so he doesn't paint any rose-colored pictures or this like, toxic positivity. There's none of that. Like this is what it is, which is that really is what surrender and acceptance is, right? Like
Yeah.
this is the moment that's before us. And just because I can accept the moment for what it is doesn't mean I'm okay with it. And I
Yeah.
think that's the difference, right? Is, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure right now if I have hope, but me being unsure about hope for where we're going in the world does not negate me being led by love. Like for me, I'm going to be like, how does love lead me in the very next moment in my
Yeah.
relationship in front of you, right? And if I can trust love with me, I can trust love with the big things of the world.
Yeah.
And instead of trying to reach over and manipulate it to fix it so that I feel safe, I'm just going to drop down into my body and know I've had an experience where I can trust love. And so today I say yes to love. Now, what does that look like? In the mundane normalcy of the day, sometimes I'm just sitting on the couch watching TV, or I'm, out doing something or whatever. But what is before me right now that I can say yes to? That's how I lead with love.
Yeah. It's so wise. I mean, and that's the answer, right? Is that we can only control the things that we can control, right? So it's every day just making the choice to lead with love, as you say, or but to extend the most generous version of ourselves to each other. And to what I think you open with this, right? Like if everyone did that, that changes everything, right? So it is that's how you change the culture, is every person making those small decisions every day to live with generosity and openness for one another.
And I wonder if maybe we can have you on again at some point and maybe talk about uh, how lament, you mentioned that, Erin, like I'm lamenting, like how lament actually works in that too, right? As a practice, that there is time for lament.
For sure. And that is
Yeah.
a conversation in itself.
That is a whole new
It's a-
conversation. I was like, can I squeeze this in?
It's
Yeah,
a
I don't think so.
cliffhanger. You left a cliffhanger, so now they have to come back, right?
Yes. Yes.
I would absolutely love to come back. Thank you both for having me today, for your beautiful conversation and questions and curiosities.
Thank you so much. This was really great.
Yeah,
I'm so
so great. Thank you, Felicia.
A huge heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners. Some of you joined us a year ago, some of you joined us recently, but all of you are helping us grow the show. Thank you so much.
Atheist is still advertising free, sponsor free, and available for free to everyone. Lots of podcasts have big production teams. Our team is just 3 friends working together to make something we hope puts good into the world and brings value to your life.
But we always need your help. Please spread the word and share the show. All of our social links and other ways to support the show are available on atheistpodcast.com.
Atheist is produced by Justin Seiwell of Trend Media, STL. Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.